So in our last video on inferential statistics, let's look at the far right of this table. But just first to recap, we compared to specific values. So we compared categories by looking at nominal versus equal across the categories or across a particular percentage for each category we expected it to be. We looked at ordinal, so we looked at ranking, Likert scales. What do we expect in terms of the median rank? We looked at ratio and interval using the one sample t-test as the average, what we expected it to be. We looked at the scenario where we have two groups with different people in those groups. And if it was categorical data, we compared the makeup of the groups, of those two different groups, how they fell into the categories with the Fisher test. For two groups, different people in those groups. If it was ordinal, so Likert scale type questions, we use the Mann-Whitney. If it's ratio or interval, so counts or measures, we use the two sample t-test to see if there's a difference in the average measure or count across those two different groups. If we have two groups and they are the same people in both groups, so it is paired, and we're looking at categories, then we look at, do their categories change, for example, over time, before or after? That's the McNamara test. If we have ranking, so a Likert scale ordinal question, we can see if how things are ranked change before and after. That's a Wilcoxon rank sum. We can look at if we have same people in both groups and it's ratio ordinal, so measurements or counts. We can look at a paired t-test to see if the average measurement or count changes before and after some kind of event or treatment. We also looked at the scenario where if we have three or more groups, and we have different people in the groups, then if it is nominal, we use a chi-squared test of independence. Is there a relationship between the variables? And so one question had three categories or more, and then the other would be a nominal type response to a question, yes, no, I don't know. And then you see, is there a relationship in terms of how the groups answered the questions. So in that case, what we have is we have a chi-squared test of independence. If it is ordinal ranking, then we use a Kruskal-Wallis test to see if there's a difference between the multiple different groups. If it is ratio or interval, then we use a one-way ANOVA to compare more than two groups when we're looking at different people in the groups. If we have the same people in all the groups, then we can compare nominal questions to see if there's a difference in how they categorize themselves, say before or after, and then after some other event. Does it change over time? That uses Cochran's Q. If it's ordinal, so there is a ranking, we use a Friedman's test. And if we have ratio or interval data, then we're using the repeated measures ANOVA. What we want to look at here is the far right of this table, which is what if we are looking at multiple questions, multiple variables. If we want to know if those variables or questions are associated with each other, are they correlated? Then if it is ordinal data, so we're looking at the rankings, so if we have two questions, how do you feel about hamburgers? How do you feel about pizza? What we want to know is if the people who like pizza, do they also like hamburgers? Do the people who hate pizza also hate hamburgers? In that case, if we're doing strongly agree to strongly disagree or the type of ranking, we use the Spearman Rank Correlation. If we have measurements or counts and we can assume a normal distribution, then we use the Pearson Product Moment Correlation coefficient. If you can't assume a normal distribution, the distribution is maybe more uniform, it's more skewed, or you don't know, then you can go with the Spearman Rank Correlation. So these are measures of association. The last part, which we won't do in this section of videos because we'll do that later, is prediction. So we're using the answers to one question to predict the responses to another question. And so from here, we're doing is regression. So we might be predicting from one variable, in which case it might be that we're using logistic regression, fall into a category, don't fall into a category, what's the likelihood that or the probability that they fall into that category. So here we have logistic regression. If we have ordinal data, so we have ranks, We have non-parametric regression. And if you have counts or measurements and you can assume continuous normal distribution, then we have a parametric regression here. So there are other types of regression we're going to look at in more detail. We have Poisson regression. And so in all of these cases, what we're doing is we're using one variable, one question to predict another. There's also regression that is multivariate. So we can have multiple variables used to predict outcomes. And so that's the part you see down here, this multivariate regression. And there is multivariate logistic regression and then multivariate regression. So these regressions we'll get into later as we get into predictive analytics, because we're predicting. Right now we're doing descriptive analytics, so we are describing what's happening with our tests. But we'll finish this off by looking at Spearman Rank and Pearson Product Moment Correlation. So let's dive into those. Just a reminder, you can find this workbook here under drstephpowers.github.io/BIA Inferential Statistics. And if you click in there, you'll also find the data sets that we've been using as well. So let's just finish off our discussion here with Spearman Rank and Pearson correlation. And let's go back to the bargaining survey. So you are collecting information from your union members. And so we're using data frame table 2 here. And we'll look at question 12 and question 15. So question 12 and question 15 from our survey. Question 12, how much control do you have over the location of your work? And question 15 is, how satisfied are you with the location where you work? So recall that there are 3 locations, north, south, and east. And so we want to know if there's a relationship between whether people have control over where they work and how satisfied they are with where they work. Maybe it's a control issue, that level of satisfaction. Maybe it's not. Let's take a look. So what we're going to do is we're going to, from skippy.stats, import Spearman R. Okay, that's the package we want to use. And then what we need to do is we simply need to put in our 2 variables. And so we have Spearman R, df2 question 12, df2 question 15. When we run this, we get a p-value of 0.028. It is less than our alpha of 0.05, telling us that there is a relationship between question 12 and question 15. So there seems to be moving in the same direction. How people answer question 12 seems to be related to how people answer question 15. So a null hypothesis assumes no relationship, and when we have a p-value less than our alpha, then there is a relation. We can compare that to the Pearson Product Moment Correlation coefficient test. To do that one, we do from skippy.stats, import Pearson R. And the challenge we have is that when you are doing correlation, we need to know how people responded to question 24 and question 17. So if you do have missing information, what you should do is you should create a separate subset table. So we're going to take DF2, we're going to create a new table that is just question 24 and question 17, and we're going to drop anywhere there's missing information in question 17 or question 24. Want to make sure we have all of that. If you had missing information up here in the Spearman Rank correlation, we want to do the same thing. We do this intermediate step where we would drop the NAs from the subset, as opposed to dropping it for each variable, because then they no longer align. So here we have Pearson R, and we'll do DF2B. That's the new table we've created, comparing question 24 and question 17. We run this test here. We get a p-value that is quite small, less than 0.05. So what this is telling us is that there is a relationship between question 24 and question 17. Remember, question 17 is in the last month, how many hours of overtime have you worked? And question 24 is how many years have you been with the company? So there does seem to be a relationship between the length of time they're with the company and how many hours of overtime they get. You can see the directionality for both Spearman Rank and Pearson in the test statistic. So we're looking at whether that is a positive or a negative number. If it is a positive number, then what we're seeing is that they're moving in the same direction, and if it's a negative, then they're moving in the opposite direction.